G'day guys, and today it's time for another Australian-centric coronavirus update. Now these are videos I'm going to be making more and more as Australia seems to be picking up in its number of cases. Looking at just this article that I'll be reading from, which was released just yesterday, the 19th of March, it talks about how there was 454 cases. Well, now you have a look at the metrics and it's close to 700. So we are hitting that stage where we're adding multiple hundreds of new cases every day. So as such, my videos will need to increase in the frequency of the upload to compensate for this. So, I can't be sitting there for 3 days, obviously, as I usually do with updates, because the situation changes radically from day to day, as we will see. So there's obviously lots of reactions to this coronavirus epidemic. The Australian government, as far back as a few weeks ago, has been rolling out, information posters, encouraging social distancing and this sort of thing. It's good to see that they're taking this seriously. Australia is obviously threatened in the tourist department, and we'll be discussing the impacts of that perhaps later on. But there are two big changes that have occurred with regards to coronavirus policy. The first one is that Australia has banned, as of yesterday, indoor gatherings of 100 people or more. Now, a few days ago, this was restricted to 500, and that was something else I was going to report on. The music festivals being cancelled and this sort of thing. But now that this has been tightened up to gatherings of 100. Now, obviously, 100 people is easily feasible in even a restaurant setting, certainly a bar or a club setting, this sort of thing. So this is obviously having a roll-on effect to the local economy, at least where I live. I'm sure where you live and that sort of thing. I've heard reports of people being laid off because it's like, look, we just simply do not need this many staff to cater for 100 people or less, and we just can't give you the hours we need. We just need to cut staff and this sort of thing. So that's unfortunate for people who will be affected by that sort of thing. And now the other big news of the day, and this is a very, very significant piece of news, is that Australia, as well as New Zealand, are closing their borders to foreigners. Essentially, what is occurring is that unless you're an Australian citizen or a permanent resident and that sort of thing, you will not be able to enter Australia for the next 6 months. So just reading from NPR. In separate announcements issued Friday, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison and New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said that visitors who are not residents or citizens of their respective countries will soon be turned away at the border, beginning Friday night in Australia, so tonight, and even sooner in New Zealand. So what is essentially the motive of this is to stop obviously new people entering the country, because as I'm about to see, Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, has told us that about 80% of the cases reported in Australia are the result of overseas travel or contact from someone who's returning overseas. So that primary source of infection, that's what most of the cases we're seeing, even weeks and weeks later after people have been returning, because again, we have this up to a month, but on average 2 weeks of asymptomatic yet still transmissible concerning this disease. So we're hoping to curb that off, and obviously this won't stop the spread of infection. This is attempting to curb it in some aspects. But this does mean that 20% of cases, 1/5 within Australia, are native transmissions, and that's something I spoke about in my previous video. Native transmission is certainly occurring within Australia. That cannot be denied at this point. No one's trying to deny that, so it's no point speaking about that. But it's certainly, as I mentioned before, picking up in pace. We've reached that stage where we're hitting hundreds of new cases every day, and this is where the UK, the US were at just a few weeks ago, and we will be hitting that stage where we're adding thousands of new cases every day. And unfortunately, as the severity of this the spread of this disease increases, the social panic, the social stress will only increase. There have been increased shortages that I've noticed in my local area. I don't know about you. Again, I don't understand why people would want to hoard toilet paper. That seems to be a luxury item. I was focusing more on lentils and pasta and bagged milk and water. Don't forget water. You never know. If you really want water, you're really going to need it. But the shortages have certainly increased in my area. So whereas before it was just toilet paper, and that was obviously something that was laughed about in the media and this sort of thing, now it's something that they're taking a little bit more seriously, because now there's very limited supplies of pasta. There's been essentially rations put on the store. So when I went to the store today, they said, hey, look, you can't get any more than 2 bags of pasta, 2 bags of tinned tomatoes, and this sort of thing, because obviously they are, it's better if everyone just has a little bit instead of, some people going in there early in the morning and just clearing everything out. And there's been other restrictions that have been put in place to take care of essentially the elderly and the disabled. So several supermarkets are saying, look, we're no longer going to do home deliveries for someone who isn't elderly or disabled. We're going to open the shops, at this hour, and we will only let people with their pensioner cards in, and this sort of thing. Just trying to help out the most vulnerable sections of society, and also prevent them from being exposed to the disease, because they're running around the store whilst everyone else is. they're obviously the vulnerable people, because again, coronavirus is certainly a highly infectious disease, but it's not very deadly to those who aren't, over the age of 70, immunocompromised and this sort of thing. It doesn't seem to kill children very much, which is very interesting considering that's how diseases usually work. They usually kill the very old and the very young, but perhaps that is just something that hasn't come to pass. So, yeah, the infection in Australia is certainly picking up steam, adding hundreds of new cases every day, and thankfully our centralised government has sought to crack down on this very hard. Obviously, coming off the back of the bushfire crisis, we got most of our political infighting over and done with that, so it's certainly very lucky. Unfortunately, we are running into autumn, so cold and flu season has begun. Myself, picking up the sniffles and being sent home from work. 4-day weekend, very handy. Can get the garden started and that sort of thing. Unpack this new room. But in terms of the severity of infection, it is something that is getting worse and worse in Australia, and it will be getting worse and worse. I see no reason why we won't get up to Italy levels and this sort of thing, because again, there is no containment on a virus that you can't see coming. Because as I mentioned in almost every video, this virus can be asymptomatic yet still transmissible for on average 2 weeks and up to a month in some cases. It's not highly deadly disease unless it mutates, of course. Then we've got a big problem. But it is highly infectious. It is pretty easy to pick up this disease, water droplets and this sort of thing. It can remain on surfaces, I've heard, for up to 9 days. And basically, unfortunately, whereas before in my videos I was suggesting people prep up, it's pretty much too late to do that now. You had your chance and you missed it. You may have not taken this disease seriously, or you didn't want to be embarrassed by this sort of thing. I wasn't. I was mocked, but look who's laughing now, me. So yeah, I encourage everyone to, maybe be ready to self-isolate. That may be the case in Australia. Have some money saved up, because as I said, people are getting laid off, especially in those tourism and the hospitality industries. This disease will certainly get worse. I wouldn't expect it to get any better. I guess all I can say is thanks all for sticking around. Stay healthy, stay safe, and have a good one.